Maria Chen walked into the music classroom every Tuesday and Thursday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. She always chose the same seat in the back row, third chair from the wall. Her backpack was old and faded blue, with a small tear near the zipper that she had fixed with clear tape. Inside, she carried 3 notebooks, 2 pens, and a water bottle that she refilled at the fountain down the hall. The other students in Music Appreciation 101 barely noticed her. They were busy talking about weekend parties, upcoming tests, and their summer vacation plans. Maria listened to their conversations while she organized her notes from the previous class. She wrote everything down in neat, small handwriting. Every date, every composer's name, every musical term that Professor Williams mentioned during his lectures. Professor Williams was a tall man with gray hair and thick glasses. He had been teaching at the university for 15 years. He loved classical music and wanted his students to love it too. But he often felt frustrated when students seemed uninterested or unprepared. He walked around the classroom during lectures, stopping to ask questions and check if students were paying attention. When Professor Williams looked at Maria, he saw a quiet young woman who never raised her hand. She always had her notebook open and her pen ready, but she seemed nervous. Sometimes she asked questions, but her voice was so soft that he had to ask her to repeat herself. Her questions were good ones, though. She asked about things like why composers chose certain keys for their pieces, or how historical events influenced musical styles. Ms. Rodriguez was the teaching assistant. She was working on her master's degree in music education. She helped Professor Williams grade papers and led small group discussions twice a week. Ms. Rodriguez noticed that Maria always turned in her assignments on time. The papers were well written and showed that Maria had read all the required materials. But during group discussions, Maria rarely spoke unless someone asked her a direct question. One Thursday morning, Ms. Rodriguez was handing back graded essays about Baroque composers. When she gave Maria her paper, she saw a grade of A- at the top. Maria had written about Bach's use of counterpoint in his fugues. The essay showed deep understanding of complex musical concepts. Ms. Rodriguez was surprised. She had expected Maria to struggle with such advanced topics. After class, Ms. Rodriguez mentioned Maria to Professor Williams. "That quiet student in the back row, Maria Chen, she wrote an excellent essay about Bach," she said. Professor Williams nodded but looked puzzled. "Really? She always seems so uncertain during lectures. I thought she might be having trouble keeping up with the material." Neither of them knew Maria's real story. They did not know that she had grown up in a small apartment above her family's restaurant. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan when Maria was 2 years old. They worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, to keep their business running. Maria learned to be quiet and independent from a very young age. When Maria was 4 and old, piano appeared in the restaurant's back room. A customer could not pay his bill, so he offered the piano instead. Maria's mother almost said no. Where would they put such a big instrument? But something made her change her mind. Maybe it was the way little Maria's eyes lit up when she saw the black and white keys. The piano was old and slightly out of tune, but it worked. Maria taught herself to play simple melodies by ear. She would sneak into the back room early in the morning before the restaurant opened and practice quietly. Her small fingers learned to find the right notes without making too much noise. Mrs. Kim lived in the apartment next door. She had been a piano teacher in Korea before moving to America. One morning, she heard Maria playing through the thin walls. The little girl was playing a simple version of Für Elise that she had heard. On the radio, Mrs. Kim was amazed. The child had learned it perfectly, with no sheet music and no lessons. Mrs. Kim knocked on the restaurant door that afternoon. She spoke to Maria's parents in broken English, offering to teach Maria piano lessons for free. She said Maria had natural talent that should not be wasted. Maria's parents were hesitant. They did not have money for a piano teacher, and Maria needed to help in the restaurant after school. But Mrs. Kim was persistent. She explained that she was lonely in her retirement and would enjoy having a student again. She promised that lessons would not interfere with Maria's family duties. Finally, Maria's parents agreed to let her try. For the next 8 years, Maria studied piano with Mrs. Kim every day after school. She learned to read music, to understand harmony and rhythm, to play pieces by Mozart, Chopin, and Debussy. Mrs. Kim was a demanding teacher, but she was also kind. She saw that Maria had not just talent, but also the discipline and passion needed to become an excellent pianist. Maria practiced 2 hours every day, 1 hour with Mrs. Kim, learning new pieces and techniques, 1 hour alone, working on assignments, and memorizing music. She played on the old piano in the restaurant's back room with its missing keys and sticky pedals. But she learned to make beautiful music anyway. When Maria was 12, Mrs. Kim entered her in a local piano competition. Maria was nervous about performing in front of strangers, but Mrs. Kim encouraged her. "Music is meant to be shared," she said. "You cannot keep your gift hidden forever." Maria won second place in her age group. The judges were impressed by her technical skill and her musical interpretation. More competitions followed. Maria won several first-place trophies and received compliments from professional musicians. Mrs. Kim was proud, and Maria's parents began to understand that their daughter had a special ability. But when Maria turned 16, everything changed. Mrs. Kim became ill and could no longer teach. Maria's parents needed more help in the restaurant as business became difficult. The economy was struggling, and fewer customers came for dinner. Maria had to work longer hours, serving tables and helping in the kitchen. There was no money for private piano lessons with another teacher. The nearest music school was too expensive and too far away. Maria kept practicing on her own, but without guidance, her progress slowed. She began to think that maybe her musical dreams were just that, dreams. When it came time for college, Maria's parents wanted her to study business or accounting, something practical that would help her get a good job and support the family. Maria agreed, but she also registered for one music class each semester. It was her way of staying connected to the things she loved most. Now, sitting in Professor Williams's classroom, Maria felt like she was living in two different worlds. In one world, she was an uncertain college student who struggled to speak up in class. In the other world, she was a pianist who could make listeners cry with the beauty of her playing, but that second world felt farther and farther away with each passing day. Professor Williams and Ms. Rodriguez saw only the first world. They saw a hard-working but quiet student who seemed overwhelmed by complex musical concepts. They had no idea that Maria could play Chopin nocturnes from memory, or that she understood the mathematical relationships between notes better than most music majors. Maria did not blame them for their assumptions. She had learned to hide her abilities to avoid standing out. It was easier to be underestimated than to face disappointment when people learned about her background and decided she did not belong in their world. The clock on the classroom wall showed 9:15 a.m. when Professor Williams walked to the front of the room carrying a stack of papers. Maria noticed that he looked more serious than usual. His gray eyebrows were pulled together in a slight frown, and he set the papers down with more force than necessary. "Good morning, class," Professor Williams said, adjusting his glasses. "I hope everyone completed the reading about Romantic period composers. Today we're going to discuss something that will significantly impact your midterm grades." 23. Students straightened in their chairs. Maria put down her pen and looked up from her notebook. She had read all the assigned chapters twice and had even researched additional information about Chopin and Liszt at the library. Professor Williams picked up the stack of papers from his desk. "These are musical scores," he announced. "Each one represents a different piece from the Romantic era. For your midterm examination, you will not be writing a paper. Instead, you will perform one of these pieces." A wave of nervous murmurs spread across the classroom. Maria heard the student sitting next to her whisper, "Oh no, I can barely play chopsticks." Another student raised her hand immediately. "Professor Williams." "What if we don't play piano?" asked Sarah, a business major who took the class for easy credit. "The university has practice rooms with pianos available for student use," Professor Williams replied. "You'll have 3 weeks to prepare. This assignment will test your understanding of romantic musical characteristics, not your technical perfection. I want you to demonstrate that you comprehend the emotional expression and stylistic elements we've been studying." Ms. Rodriguez stood up from her seat at the side of the room. "Don't worry too much," she said with an encouraging smile. "We're not expecting professional-level performances. We want to see effort and understanding of the musical concepts." Professor Williams began calling names alphabetically. "Adams Jennifer." He handed her a piece of sheet music. Jennifer looked at it and sighed with relief. "Schumann's Troy Marai," Professor Williams explained. "A beautiful, gentle piece that shouldn't be too challenging." Baker, Michael. Michael received a Chopin waltz, one of the easier ones. He looked nervous, but nodded when Professor Williams explained that it had a simple, repetitive melody. Maria watched as each student received their assignment. She noticed that Professor Williams was being careful to match pieces with what he thought were the students' abilities. The music majors got more complex compositions. Students who seemed less confident received simpler melodies. Carter, Lisa, who had mentioned playing violin in high school, received a Brahms intermezzo. "Chen, Maria." Professor Williams looked through his remaining papers. His expression changed to one of concern. Maria walked to the front of the classroom to receive her assignment. Professor Williams hesitated before handing her the sheet music. When Maria looked at the title page, her heart skipped a beat. Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Opera 23, by Frédéric Chopin. Maria knew this piece well, very well. It was one of the most technically demanding compositions in the piano repertoire. She had learned it 3 years ago and had performed it in a competition when she was 17. But looking at Professor Williams' worried expression, she realized he had no idea what he had just given her. "Maria," Professor Williams said slowly, "I'm afraid this is the only piece left. It's quite challenging. Perhaps more challenging than what you're prepared for." He glanced at Ms. Rodriguez, who walked over to see what was happening. Ms. Rodriguez looked at the sheet music and her eyes widened. "Professor Williams, this is an extremely difficult piece. It requires advanced technical skills and years of training." She looked at Maria with sympathy. "Chopin's ballads are considered among the most challenging works in piano literature." Maria stood quietly, holding the music. Inside, she felt a mixture of excitement and amusement. This was a piece she could play beautifully, with all the emotional depth and technical precision it required. But she also understood why her teachers were concerned. "I could ask if any other student would be willing to switch," Professor Williams suggested. "Perhaps someone with more musical experience would be better suited for this particular composition." "Or," Ms. Rodriguez added, "you could choose to write a research paper instead. We could arrange an alternative assignment that doesn't require performance skills you might not have developed yet." Maria looked at both of her teachers. They were trying to be kind, trying to save her from what they believed would be an embarrassing failure. She appreciated their concern, but she also saw an opportunity to challenge herself in a way she had not been challenged in years. "I would like to try the piece," Maria said quietly. Her voice was soft, as usual, but there was something different in her tone. A small note of confidence that neither Professor Williams nor Ms. Rodriguez caught. Professor Williams frowned. "Maria, I want you to understand what you're taking on. This ballade requires not just technical skill, but deep musical understanding. Chopin wrote it as an expression of complex emotions. It tells a story through music. The tempo changes. The dynamic contrasts, the technical passages, they're all extremely demanding. Professional pianists spend months preparing pieces like this, Ms. Rodriguez added. And you only have 3 weeks. Maria nodded. I understand, but I would still like to try. The other students had been listening to this conversation with growing interest. Some looked relieved that they had received easier assignments. Others seemed curious about what would happen when Maria attempted such a difficult piece. David, a music major who had received a moderately challenging Schumann piece, spoke up. Professor Williams, I'd be willing to switch with Maria if she wants. I've played some Chopin before. Professor Williams considered this offer. It would certainly solve the problem. David had much more musical training than Maria. It would make sense for him to take the challenging piece while Maria worked on something more appropriate for her skill level. But Maria surprised everyone by shaking her head. Thank you, David, but I want to keep this assignment. She looked directly at Professor Williams. If I fail, at least I'll have learned something about my own limitations. But I'd like the chance to try. Professor Williams studied Maria's face. He saw determination there, mixed with what looked like nervous excitement. Despite his concerns, he found himself respecting her willingness to take on such a challenge. Perhaps the experience would teach her valuable lessons about setting realistic goals. Very well, he said finally. But I want you to understand that effort and improvement will be more important than perfect execution. If you can play even small sections of this piece with understanding and musical sensitivity, you can still earn a good grade, Ms. Rodriguez added. And please, come to office hours if you need help. We can work through difficult passages together or help you find recordings to study. Maria thanked them both and returned to her seat. As she sat down, she opened the score and looked at the familiar notation. The opening measures brought back memories of countless hours spent practicing with Mrs. Kim, of competitions won, of the joy she felt when music flowed through her fingers onto the piano keys. The student sitting beside her, Jake, leaned over to look at the music. Wow, that looks impossible, he whispered. All those notes and look at those tempo markings. Are you sure you want to try this? Maria smiled slightly. I think it will be interesting, she said. For the rest of the class period, Professor Williams discussed performance techniques and practice strategies. He talked about the importance of starting slowly, focusing on accuracy before speed, and understanding the historical context of each piece. Maria took careful notes, but inside she was already planning her approach to the ballade. She knew she would have to be very careful about how she practiced. She could not let Professor Williams or Ms. Rodriguez discover her real abilities too soon. The surprise would be worth much more if she could maintain their current expectations right up until the performance day. As class ended and students began packing their bags, Maria carefully placed the Chopin score in her notebook. She was looking forward to the next 3 weeks more than she had looked forward to anything in a long time. Maria spent her lunch break in the university library, looking up the practice room schedule. The music building had 12 small rooms with upright pianos where students could work on their assignments. Each room could be reserved for 2-hour blocks, and the sign-up sheet showed that most slots between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. were already taken by music majors. She found an available slot every Tuesday and Thursday from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. right after her music appreciation class. She also signed up for Saturday mornings from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., when most students were still sleeping. The evening slots from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. were usually open, but those required special permission from the music department. Maria decided to ask Ms. Rodriguez about evening practice time. After all, her teachers thought she needed all the help she could get with such a difficult piece. The next Tuesday, Maria stayed after class while the other students packed their bags and headed to their next classes. Professor Williams was erasing the whiteboard, and Ms. Rodriguez was organizing papers at her desk. Ms. Rodriguez, Maria said quietly, I was wondering if I could get permission to use the practice rooms in the evening. I think I'll need extra time to work on the Chopin piece. Ms. Rodriguez looked up with a sympathetic expression. Of course, Maria. I think that's very wise of you. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a form. Just fill this out, and I'll approve it. You can practice until 10 p.m., but remember that the building locks at 10:30, so don't stay too late. Professor Williams turned around from the whiteboard. That's good planning, Maria. How are you feeling about the piece so far? Have you had a chance to look through it? I've started reading through it, Maria replied truthfully. It's definitely challenging. Remember, don't try to play it at full speed right away, Professor Williams advised. Start very slowly, maybe just a few measures at a time. Focus on getting the notes correct before you worry about expression or tempo. Maria nodded and thanked him. She was amused by the advice, since she had learned those same fundamentals more than 10 years ago. But she appreciated his concern. That afternoon, Maria went to practice room 7, a small space with beige walls and a slightly out-of-tune upright piano. She closed the door and sat at the bench, placing the Chopin score on the music stand. For a moment, she just sat there, feeling the familiar weight of piano keys under her fingers. She began to play the opening measures of the ballade very slowly and deliberately, making sure to hit some wrong notes and pause uncertainly at difficult passages. She knew that other students sometimes listened outside practice room doors, and she wanted to maintain the impression that she was struggling with the piece. After about 30 minutes of this careful practice, Maria heard a knock on the door. She opened it to find Ms. Rodriguez standing in the hallway with a concerned expression. Hi, Maria. I was walking by and thought I'd check on how things are going. Ms. Rodriguez stepped into the small room. I know this piece can be overwhelming at first. It's pretty difficult, Maria said, which was not entirely untrue. The ballade was genuinely challenging, even for experienced pianists. I'm trying to work through it slowly, like Professor Williams suggested. That's exactly right, Ms. Rodriguez said approvingly. Mind if I listen for a few minutes? Maybe I can offer some suggestions. Maria sat back down at the piano and began playing the opening section again. She deliberately made it sound hesitant and unpracticed, stumbling over passages that she could actually play perfectly. She even stopped in the middle of a phrase and said, Sorry, I'm having trouble with this part. Ms. Rodriguez nodded encouragingly. That's a very difficult transition. Here, let me show you something. She sat beside Maria on the bench and played the passage very slowly, explaining the fingering and the musical logic behind Chopin's notation. Maria listened attentively and thanked Ms. Rodriguez for the help. Inside, she was touched by her teacher's genuine desire to help her succeed, even though the help was unnecessary. You're making good progress for just one day, Ms. Rodriguez said as she prepared to leave. Remember, the goal isn't perfection. Professor Williams and I just want to see that you understand the musical ideas Chopin was trying to express. After Ms. Rodriguez left, Maria continued her careful charade for another hour. She played sections repeatedly, as if trying to memorize them. She wrote fingering numbers in pencil on the score, just as a struggling student might do. She even played some passages with deliberately poor phrasing, then corrected herself as if discovering better interpretations. Thursday's practice session followed a similar pattern. Maria maintained her act of being a dedicated but overwhelmed student. Professor Williams stopped by this time, listening from the doorway for a few minutes before entering. How are you feeling about the piece now? He asked kindly. I think I'm starting to understand it better, Maria replied. The more I practice, the more I can hear what Chopin was trying to do. Professor Williams smiled. That's exactly the right approach. Music isn't just about playing the right notes. It's about understanding the composer's intentions and finding ways to express those ideas through your performance. He sat down and played through a particularly complex section, showing Maria how to handle the technical challenges while maintaining musical flow. His playing was competent but not exceptional. Maria realized that Professor Williams was a good teacher and a knowledgeable musician, but not a virtuoso performer. Don't worry if you can't play every note perfectly, he said. Focus on capturing the emotional character of the music. Chopin wrote this ballade to tell a story. If you can help your audience feel that story, you'll have succeeded. Maria nodded, seriously, as if this were new information to her. In reality, she had learned these same concepts years ago from Mrs. Kim, who had taught her that technical skill without emotional understanding was meaningless. Saturday morning practice was different. The music building was nearly empty, with only a few dedicated students working in scattered practice rooms. Maria felt safe enough to play more authentically, though she still held back from revealing her full abilities. She allowed herself to play through larger sections of the ballade with fewer mistakes. She explored different interpretative choices, testing various approaches to phrasing and dynamics. It felt wonderful to work with this music again, even in this limited way. During one of these Saturday sessions, David, the music major who had offered to switch pieces with her, knocked on her door. "Hey, Maria. I heard you practicing when I walked by. How's the Chopin going?" "It's getting better," Maria said. "Still pretty hard, though." David listened while she played through the opening section, deliberately including a few minor errors. "Actually, that doesn't sound bad at all," he said with surprise. "I was expecting it to be much rougher. You're getting the basic structure, and your rhythm is pretty steady." "Thank you," Maria said. "I've been practicing a lot." "Well, keep it up. You might actually pull this off." David seemed genuinely impressed by what he perceived as rapid improvement from a non-musician. As the days passed, Maria developed a routine. During her scheduled practice times, when other people might hear or visit, she played the role of a hard-working student, making gradual progress on an extremely difficult piece. She asked questions that a real beginner might ask, made mistakes that showed she was learning, and expressed appropriate concern about the upcoming performance. But late at night, when the practice rooms were empty and the building was quiet, Maria allowed herself to truly practice. She worked on subtle interpretative details, perfected the most challenging technical passages, and explored the deep emotional content of Chopin's music. She had to be very careful about timing. She could not show too much improvement too quickly, or her teachers would become suspicious. But she also needed to demonstrate enough progress to justify her continued work on the piece. Professor Williams and Ms. Rodriguez began to speak about Maria's situation during their office hours. They were surprised by her determination and impressed by her steady improvement. They had expected her to give up or ask for an easier piece within the first week. "She's actually making real progress," Ms. Rodriguez told Professor Williams. "I mean, she's nowhere near ready to perform this piece at a professional level, but she's understanding the musical concepts." "I'm beginning to think we underestimated her," Professor Williams replied. "Her questions show deeper musical thinking than I initially realized. And her work ethic is remarkable." Neither of them suspected that Maria was carefully managing their perceptions, showing them exactly the level of ability and progress that would maintain their helpful concern without revealing her true capabilities. As the end of the second week approached, Maria felt a growing excitement about the upcoming performance. She had not played for an audience in more than 2 years, not since her last competition as a teenager. The prospect of sharing music again, even in this unusual circumstance, filled her with anticipation. She also felt a strange affection for Professor Williams and Ms. Rodriguez. Their willingness to help a student they believed was struggling showed their genuine care for their student's success. When the time came to reveal her abilities, she hoped they would understand why she had chosen to surprise them rather than reveal the truth from the beginning. Friday morning arrived with gray clouds and light rain tapping against the windows of the music building. Maria woke up at 6 o'clock, 2 hours earlier than usual. She had barely slept, not from nervousness, but from excitement. Today, she would finally be able to share her music with others again. She chose her clothes carefully, a simple black dress that she had worn to competitions years ago, and low black shoes that would not slip on the piano pedals. She tied her long hair back in a neat bun and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like what she was about to become again, at least for 15 minutes, a pianist. The performance sessions were scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. in the music building's small recital hall. The room had 50 seats arranged in rows facing a black grand piano. Maria had practiced on upright pianos for 3 weeks, but she would perform on this much better instrument. She arrived at the building at 9:30 and walked past the recital hall. Through the small window in the door, she could see Professor Williams and Ms. Rodriguez setting up chairs and adjusting the piano bench. A few early students were already sitting in the front row, looking nervous and shuffling through their sheet music. Maria went to practice room 7 for one final warm-up session. She played through some simple scales and arpeggios to loosen her fingers, then ran through a few sections of the ballade at half speed. She did not want to tire her hands before the actual performance. At 9:50, she gathered her score and walked to the recital hall. The room was now about half full. She recognized most of her classmates, but she also noticed some people she did not know. Professor Williams saw her come in and walked over. "Good morning, Maria. How are you feeling?" His voice was kind but concerned. "A little nervous," Maria replied truthfully. She was nervous, but not in the way he imagined. "That's completely normal," Professor Williams said. "Remember, we're not expecting perfection. Just do your best and try to communicate what you've learned about the music." Ms. Rodriguez approached them, carrying a clipboard with the performance schedule. "Maria, you're scheduled to perform 8th, about halfway through the session. That should give you time to settle in and listen to some of the other performances first." Maria thanked them and found a seat in the 4th row. She placed her score on the seat beside her and tried to look appropriately nervous. Around her, students were whispering to each other about their pieces and practice experiences. The performances began promptly at 10 a.m. Jennifer Adams played Schumann's Träumerei with careful precision but little emotional expression. Her technique was basic but adequate, and she managed to get through the piece without major mistakes. Professor Williams and Ms. Rodriguez nodded approvingly and made notes on their evaluation sheets. Michael Baker's Chopin Waltz was more ambitious. He had clearly worked hard on the piece, but his playing was stiff and mechanical. He missed several notes in the more complex passages and had to stop twice to find his place in the music. Still, his effort was obvious, and the audience applauded encouragingly when he finished. As each student performed, Maria noticed that Professor Williams and Ms. Rodriguez were focusing more on effort and musical understanding than on technical perfection. They seemed pleased when students showed they had studied the historical context of their pieces, even if their playing was not polished. David performed a Schumann piece that he had switched to after offering his original assignment. To Maria, his playing was competent and musical, reflecting his formal training. Professor Williams smiled broadly during David's performance and made several positive notes on his evaluation form. "Maria Chen," Ms. Rodriguez called after the 7th performance. "You're next." Maria stood up and walked toward the piano, carrying her score. As she passed the front row, she heard someone whisper, "This is the girl who got the impossible Chopin piece." Another voice responded, "I feel so bad for her. She's going to be humiliated." Professor Williams had positioned himself near the piano to offer encouragement. "Remember," he said quietly as Maria approached, "just focus on expressing what the music means to you. Don't worry about the technical challenges." Maria nodded and placed her score on the piano's music stand, even though she had memorized every note weeks ago. She adjusted the bench height slightly and tested the pedals. The grand piano felt luxurious after weeks of practicing on the old uprights. She looked out at the audience. 50 faces stared back at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy. In the back of the room, she noticed Dr. Patterson, the music department head. Professor Williams must have invited him to observe what they expected to be a learning experience about realistic goal setting. Ms. Rodriguez gave her an encouraging nod from her seat at the side of the room. Professor Williams stepped back, giving Maria space to begin whenever she felt ready. Maria placed her hands above the keyboard and took a deep breath. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember Mrs. Kim's voice. Music is meant to be shared. You cannot keep your gift hidden forever. She began. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor rang out with perfect clarity and precise timing. The audience immediately sat up straighter. This did not sound like the hesitant attempt they had been expecting. As Maria progressed through the first section, her playing revealed not just technical accuracy, but deep musical understanding. Every phrase was shaped with sensitivity to Chopin's intentions. Her dynamic control was sophisticated, building tension and releasing it with the skill of an experienced performer. Professor Williams's mouth fell open. Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair, her evaluation form forgotten. Around the room, students who had been preparing to offer polite, sympathetic applause were instead listening with growing amazement. Maria moved into the more technically demanding middle section of the ballade. Her fingers navigated the complex passages with ease, never losing sight of the musical line that connected all the notes. When she reached the dramatic climax of the piece, she played with a passion and intensity that filled the small recital hall with sound. The final section required the most delicate balance of technical control and emotional expression. Maria played it with the maturity of someone who understood not just how to execute the notes, but why Chopin had written them. The ending, marked by gentle, questioning phrases that gradually fade to silence, was performed with such sensitivity that the audience held its breath. When the last note faded away, the recital hall remained completely silent for several seconds. Then Dr. Patterson began to applaud, followed immediately by the rest of the audience. The applause was not the polite, encouraging response they had given to previous performances. It was genuine appreciation for exceptional musicianship. Maria sat at the piano bench, slightly overwhelmed by the reaction. She had forgotten how it felt to share music with others, to see the impact that truly expressive playing could have on listeners. Professor Williams approached the piano with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Maria," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" Before Maria could answer, Dr. Patterson walked down from the back of the room. "Young lady," he said, "that was one of the finest performances of that ballade I've heard from a student. You have exceptional talent." Ms. Rodriguez joined them at the piano, shaking her head in amazement. "Maria, I don't understand. 3 weeks. Ago, you could barely get through the opening measures. What happened?" The other students were buzzing with excitement and confusion. David looked stunned. "I offered to switch pieces with her," he told his neighbor. "I thought I was being helpful. She could have played my piece with her eyes closed." Professor Williams was still staring at Maria as if seeing her for the first time. "I need to understand what just happened here," he said. "That level of performance doesn't develop in 3 weeks. That represents years of serious training." Maria looked around at all the surprised faces. She realized that her moment of revelation had arrived sooner than planned. She had intended to explain her background after the performance, but the shock of hearing her play at full ability had made immediate explanation necessary. "I think," she said quietly, "I have some things to tell you about my musical background." The remaining students were supposed to perform after Maria, but Professor Williams called for a 15-minute break. Everyone needed time to process what they had just witnessed. As the audience filed out of the recital hall for coffee and discussion, Maria remained at the piano, preparing to finally tell the truth about who she really was. When the 15-minute break ended, the recital hall felt different. Instead of students nervously preparing for their own performances, everyone seemed focused on understanding what had just happened. Professor Williams asked the remaining, performers if they would mind delaying their presentations so that the class could discuss Maria's performance. Dr. Patterson took a seat in the front row, clearly intending to stay for this conversation. Ms. Rodriguez sat beside the piano, still, looking amazed. Professor Williams remained standing, as if he were too restless to sit down. "Maria," Professor Williams began, "I think we all need to understand what we just witnessed. That performance was not the work of someone learning this piece for the first time." Maria looked around the room at all the expectant faces. She had imagined this moment many times over the past 3 weeks, but now that it was here, she felt nervous about sharing her story. "You're right," she said quietly. "I didn't learn this piece in 3 weeks. I learned it 3 years ago." "3 years ago?" Ms. Rodriguez repeated. "But you're in Music Appreciation 101. That's an introductory class." "I know," Maria said. "I can explain why, but it's a long story." Dr. Patterson leaned forward. "We have time. I think we'd all like to hear it." Maria took a deep breath and began. "I started playing piano when I was 4 years old. My family owns a small restaurant, and a customer gave us an old piano instead of paying his bill. I taught myself to play simple songs by ear." She told them about Mrs. Kim, the retired piano teacher who had lived next door and had given her free lessons for 8 years. She described the hours of practice in the restaurant's back room, the competitions she had won, the trophies that still sat on a shelf in her childhood bedroom. "Mrs. Kim was very demanding," Maria explained. "She made me learn pieces by Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Debussy. She taught me music theory, harmony, and composition. By the time I was 16, I was playing advanced repertoire." Professor Williams shook his head slowly. "But why didn't you tell us about your background? Why let us think you were a beginner?" Maria's expression became more serious. "When I was 16, Mrs. Kim became ill and couldn't teach anymore. My family's restaurant was struggling financially. My parents needed me to work more hours, and there was no money for private lessons with another teacher." She explained how she had kept practicing on her own, but without guidance, her musical development had slowed. When it came time for college, her parents had insisted she study something practical rather than music. "I take one music class each semester because I still love music," Maria said. "But I'm majoring in business. My parents think it's more practical." Ms. Rodriguez looked confused. "But with your level of ability, you could easily be accepted into a music performance program. Why waste that talent in business classes?" "Because talent doesn't pay for college," Maria replied simply. "My family can't afford conservatory tuition. I'm here on financial aid, working part-time jobs to pay for books and living expenses. Music school is expensive, and there's no guarantee of employment after graduation." Dr. Patterson had been listening intently throughout Maria's explanation. Now he spoke up. "Maria, have you ever applied for music scholarships? With your level of ability, you could qualify for significant financial assistance." "I looked into it when I first came to the university," Maria said. "But most music scholarships require auditions, and I've been out of regular lessons for 2 years. I wasn't confident that my playing was still at scholarship level." Professor Williams laughed, but it was not an unkind laugh. "Maria, after what we just heard, I think we can safely say your playing is at scholarship level." David raised his hand from his seat in the third row. "Can I ask why you let us all think you were struggling with the piece? You could have told Professor Williams about your background from the beginning." Maria considered the question carefully. "I guess I've gotten used to not standing out. When people learn about my musical training, they sometimes treat me differently. They either expect too much or they assume I think I'm better than everyone else." She paused, then continued. "Also, I wasn't sure how good my playing still was. It's been 2 years since I performed for anyone. I thought maybe this assignment would be a way to test myself, to see if I still had the ability I used to have." Ms. Rodriguez was taking notes rapidly. "Maria, I need to ask you something important. Are you interested in studying music seriously? Again?" Because if you are, we need to talk about your options. Before Maria could answer, Dr. Patterson stood up. Ms. Rodriguez is right. Maria, what you demonstrated today suggests that you have conservatory-level abilities. It would be a tragedy to waste that kind of talent. But I'm already halfway through my business degree, Maria said, and my family is counting on me to get a practical education that will lead to stable employment. Professor Williams walked over to stand beside the piano. Maria, let me ask you something. When you were playing just now, how did it feel? Maria's expression softened. It felt like coming home, she said quietly. It felt like remembering who I used to be. Then you owe it to yourself to explore your options, Dr. Patterson said firmly. There are ways to combine musical training with practical career preparation. Music education, arts administration, music therapy. There are many paths that could satisfy both your artistic needs and your family's concerns about employment. Ms. Rodriguez was still writing furiously. Dr. Patterson, what about the Performing Arts Scholarship Program? The deadline for next year's applications isn't until next month. Exactly what I was thinking, Dr. Patterson replied. Maria, the university offers full scholarships for exceptional musical talent. The program covers tuition, housing, and provides a stipend for living expenses. Recipients are required to perform in university ensembles and complete some teaching assistance. But it's designed for students exactly like you. Maria looked overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. I hadn't considered that there might be opportunities like that available. Professor Williams sat down in the front row. Maria, I owe you an apology. Ms. Rodriguez and I made assumptions about your abilities based on your appearance and your behavior in class. We didn't take the time to really get to know you or understand your background. We're not the only ones, Ms. Rodriguez added. I think this whole experience should remind all of us not to underestimate people based on first impressions. Dr. Patterson walked over to Maria. I'd like to make you an offer. Would you be willing to perform for our scholarship committee next week? I can arrange an audition that would allow them to evaluate your abilities for next year's program. But what about my business classes? Maria asked. What would I tell my parents? You don't have to decide anything today, Dr. Patterson assured her. Just take the audition, see what kind of scholarship package we can offer. Then you can make an informed decision about your future. Professor Williams nodded enthusiastically. And Maria, regardless of what you decide about changing majors, I want you to know that you've taught all of us something important today. You've reminded us that exceptional people can come from anywhere and that we shouldn't limit others based on our own assumptions. David stood up from his seat. Can I say something? Maria, I've been a music major for 3 years and I've never heard anyone in our program play as beautifully as you just did. If you decide to audition for scholarships, I think you have a real chance. Other students began speaking up, offering encouragement and expressing amazement at Maria's performance. Sarah, the business major who had been worried about playing Simple Pieces, said, I feel like I just witnessed something magical. You made that music tell a story. As the discussion continued, Maria felt a mixture of emotions. She was grateful for the encouragement and the unexpected opportunities that were being offered, but she was also anxious about the conversations she would need to have with her family. Ms. Rodriguez seemed to understand her concerns. Maria, would it help if Professor Williams and I spoke with your parents? We could explain the scholarship opportunities and help them understand that musical training can lead to stable, well-paying careers. They've sacrificed so much for my education already, Maria said. I don't want them to think I'm being ungrateful for their support. Dr. Patterson smiled. Maria, I think your parents will be very proud when they learn about your exceptional abilities. Most parents want their children to pursue their talents and find careers that make them happy. The remaining students eventually performed their pieces, but the mood in the recital hall had changed completely. Everyone had been affected by Maria's performance and the discussions that followed. Several students approached Maria afterward, asking questions about her training and expressing interest in hearing her play again. As the session ended, Professor Williams, Ms. Rodriguez, and Dr. Patterson gathered around Maria to discuss next steps. They scheduled a meeting for the following Monday to prepare for her scholarship audition. They also arranged for her to meet with the university's career counseling office to explore different ways of combining musical training with practical career preparation. Walking out of the music building that afternoon, Maria felt as if her life had changed completely in the space of a few hours.